I thought the surprise was candles, jazz, and a man finally trying. I believed the balcony was where the night got romantic. Then I heard my husband whisper one sentence into his phone. Calm and clinical, already celebrating my accident. In the space between one sip and the next, I realized our anniversary was not a date. It was a deadline. My name is Haley Morgan, and I was 34 years old the night I walked into my own kitchen and felt the distinct, cold prickle of a crime scene, even though everything looked like a romance novel. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, a milestone that is supposed to be celebrated with wood according to tradition. But my husband, Grant, had apparently decided to celebrate it with a theatrical production. I stood in the entryway, clutching my purse strap with white knuckles, trying to process the visual data before me. Grant was standing by the kitchen island, and he was cooking. This was the first anomaly. In the 5 years we had shared this living space, Grant's culinary expertise had begun and ended with ordering takeout or burning toast. Yet, here he was, wearing a crisp apron over his dress shirt, skillfully sautéing something that smelled of garlic, rosemary, and expensive intentions. The lights were dimmed low, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. A playlist of soft, instrumental jazz drifted from the speakers in the corner. Miles Davis, I thought, or perhaps something curated specifically to induce a sense of calm. Candles were scattered across the dining table and the countertops, their flames dancing in the draft from the air conditioner. It was perfect. It was absolutely, terrifyingly perfect. I work as a senior forensic auditor for the Caldwell and Rook Integrity Group. My job, simply put, is to look at things that appear normal on the surface, spreadsheets, corporate expenses, inventory logs, and find the rot underneath. I investigate internal fraud. I spend 40 to 60 hours a week listening to people explain why the numbers do not add up, watching their eyes dart to the left, noticing the micro-expressions of guilt that flash across a face when a lie is being constructed. I have trained myself to hear the things people are trying desperately not to say. So when I looked at Grant, I did not just see a loving husband preparing a surprise dinner. I saw a man who was performing. He turned to face me, a dazzling smile plastered on his face, but his eyes did not stay on mine. They flicked, just for a fraction of a second, to the large analog clock hanging on the wall above the refrigerator. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. He had checked that clock 3 times in the span of the 10 seconds I'd been standing there. "Haley, darling," he said, his voice smooth, richer than usual. "You are home early. I was hoping to have everything plated before you walked in." "I am right on time, Grant," I replied, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. I walked over to kiss him, and I felt the tension in his shoulders. He was rigid, like a coiled spring. Underneath the scent of cooking herbs and his cologne, I smelled sweat, not the sweat of a man laboring over a hot stove, but the sharp, acidic scent of adrenaline. "Happy anniversary," he whispered against my hair, but he pulled away too quickly. He turned back to the counter, his hands moving with a frantic sort of energy. "Sit, please. I am making us a drink, a special one." I sat on one of the high stools at the island, placing my chin in my hands, observing him with the detached scrutiny I usually reserved for embezzling CFOs. Grant was clumsy. This was a fact of our marriage. He dropped keys, he tripped over rugs, and he broke wine glasses. But tonight, as he reached for the cocktail shaker, his movements were precise, surgical. He lined up the bottles, a high-end gin, a bottle of elderflower liqueur, and a small, unmarked vial of something clear. He did not free pour. He picked up the silver jigger and measured the liquid with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. He poured 1 ounce of gin. He poured half an ounce of the liqueur. He held the unmarked vial up to the light, checking the level, before adding exactly 3 drops to one of the glasses. "What is that?" I asked, keeping my voice light, playful. Grant froze for a nanosecond before recovering. "Bitters," he said, too quickly. "Orange bitters. It balances the sweetness." He began to shake the mixture. The sound of the ice slamming against the metal walls of the shaker filled the room. A rhythmic, aggressive clatter that drowned out the jazz. He shook it hard, his eyes fixed on the condensation forming on the silver. His jaw clenched tight. Why was he so focused? Why did this drink matter so much? "I call it the anniversary spark," he said, pouring the liquid into 2 crystal coupes. The liquid was pale, shimmering in the candlelight. He garnished them with twists of lemon peel, his fingers nimble and steady. "Because tonight is about reigniting things. Haley, it is about our future. I have a feeling everything is going to change for us after tonight." "Change how?" I asked. He slid 1 glass toward me. The drink sat there on the marble counter, innocent and cold. "We have had some rough patches," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "The debt, the stress, but I have been working on something, a way out, a way up. After tonight, we are going to be free of all that." Free, the word hung in the air, heavy and ambiguous. I looked at the drink, then I looked at him. He was watching the glass, not me. He was waiting for me to pick it up. A normal husband would be looking at his wife, gauging her reaction to the romantic gesture. Grant was looking at the liquid like it was the detonator to a bomb he had just armed. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A slow, heavy thud. "You are being paranoid." I told myself, "This is your job bleeding into your life." He is just nervous. He wants it to be perfect because he knows we have been drifting apart. He is trying, but the investigator in me, the woman who had caught a vice president stealing $2 million because he bought a car he could not afford, refused to be silenced. The pattern was wrong. The behavior was inconsistent with the subject's baseline. The deviation was significant. "It looks beautiful." "Grant," I said, making no move to touch the stem of the glass. He smiled, but the corners of his eyes did not crinkle. "Well, do not just look at it. Try it. I made it just for you." He picked up his own glass, his fingers gripping it tightly. "Actually," he said, glancing at the clock again, 7:10 now. "Let's take these outside. The weather is beautiful. I want to toast on the balcony, under the city lights." "The balcony," I repeated. "Yes, fresh air, new beginnings." He was already moving, walking toward the sliding glass doors that led to our 6th-floor terrace. He held his drink in one hand and gestured for me to follow with the other. The urgency was palpable now. He needed me on that balcony. He needed me to drink that cocktail. I stared at the glass in front of me for 1 second longer. My gut was screaming at me. It was a physical sensation, a sharp hook pulling at my solar plexus, warning me that the man walking away from me was not the man I married. He was a stranger wearing my husband's face, and he was leading me into a trap. I took a breath, smoothed my dress, and picked up the glass. I forced a smile onto my face, masking the terror that was beginning to pool in my stomach. I would play my part. I would walk onto the stage he had set, but I would not be the victim he had written into the script. I was walking into a crime scene. Yes, but for the first time in my career, I was there before the body fell. "Coming, darling," I called out, and I followed him into the dark. The sliding glass door glided shut behind me, muting the jazz music to a dull thrum. The evening air on the balcony was cooler than inside, carrying the metallic tang of the city mixed with the exhaust of 1,000 cars below. It should have been refreshing, but instead, it felt like the drop in temperature one feels when entering a morgue. Grant was already at the small bistro table we had set up in the corner, fussing with the position of an ice bucket. He had his back to me, his shoulders hunched in a posture that suggested he was protecting something. "Just a second," he called out over his shoulder, his voice tight. "I want everything to be perfect before we toast." I stood near the railing, clutching the stem of my glass so hard I feared the crystal might snap in my palm. I did not sit down. My instincts, honed by years of analyzing fraudulent ledgers and deceptive testimony, told me to keep my feet under me. I took a step to the side, positioning myself in the shadows where the light from the living room did not quite reach. I pretended to look out at the skyline, at the grid of amber and white lights stretching out toward the horizon, but my attention was entirely focused on the man 5 feet away from me. I slowly reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the camera icon. To any observer, even to Grant if he turned around, it would look like a sentimental wife preparing to capture a snapshot of a romantic anniversary evening. But that was not my intent. I swiped to the video function, keeping the brightness low. I needed a record. If my gut was right, if the alarm bells ringing in my head were not just paranoia, I needed objective proof. Just as I raised the phone, framing his back against the city lights, I saw him stiffen. A low, insistent vibration buzzed against the metal table. It was his phone. Grant moved with a speed that was jarring. He snatched the device from the table before the second buzz could finish, his body twisting instinctively to shield the screen from my line of sight. It was the classic defensive maneuver of a man guarding a secret, the same way an executive hides a second set of books when the auditor walks in. He did not reject the call. He answered it. He pressed the phone to his ear, his head ducking low, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He thought the wind and the distance would mask his words. He was wrong. I remained perfectly still, regulating my breathing, letting my senses expand. In my line of work, you learn to filter out the white noise, the traffic, the wind, the distant sirens, and lock onto the signal. "I can't talk right now," he hissed, but he did not hang up. I took a silent step closer, my phone still raised, the record button glowing red on the screen. A voice leaked from his receiver. It was faint, tinny, but the night air carried it with terrifying clarity. It was a woman. Her voice was high, pitched with an urgency that scraped against my nerves. It was young, too young. "Have you started yet?" she demanded. The sound was distinct enough that my phone's microphone might have caught it. Grant gripped the railing with his free hand, his knuckles white. "Calm down," he said, his tone authoritative, but laced with his own panic. "Tonight it is done. Tomorrow morning everything belongs to us." The words hit me like physical blows, one after another. Belongs to us. The possessive pronoun excluded me entirely. I was no longer part of the equation. I was the obstacle being removed. The woman on the other end said something else, frantic and muffled, asking about the method. Grant cut her off, his voice dropping even lower, cold and clinical. "Stop worrying. It will look like a stroke or a massive cardiac event. The mix is untraceable. No one will suspect a thing." I felt the blood drain from my face, pooling somewhere in my feet. The glass in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. A grenade with the pin pulled. Stroke. Cardiac event. He wasn't just leaving me. He wasn't just having an affair. He was orchestrating my erasure. "What about the paperwork?" the woman asked. I could hear the greed in her tone, sharp and hungry. "The insurance policy is signed," Grant assured her. And for the first time, I heard a smile in his voice, a cruel, triumphant sound. "It is a large payout, $2 million, enough to clear the debts and start over. We just have to wait." He paused, listening to her, then delivered the final instruction. "Just relax," he said. "It is all in motion, as long as she drinks." As long as she drinks. The world seemed to stop spinning. The traffic noise below faded into a dull roar. The wind died down. There was only that sentence, hanging in the air between us, severing the last 5 years of my life from reality. I did not scream. I did not drop the glass. I did not rush forward to claw at his face or demand an explanation. Those were the reactions of a heartbroken wife. And that woman had ceased to exist the moment he mentioned the insurance policy. I stood frozen, like a statue carved from ice. My heart was not racing. It had slowed down, beating with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. My brain, usually a whirlwind of thoughts, suddenly cleared. The emotional centers, grief, betrayal, shock, shut down completely. They were liabilities now. I lowered my phone slowly, pressing the stop button on the recording. I slipped it back into my pocket, feeling the cool glass against my hip. I looked at the drink in my hand, the anniversary spark. The pale liquid swirled gently as my hand trembled. Just once, before steadying. This was not a marriage anymore. It was a war zone. And he had fired the first shot without realizing I was wearing armor. Grant let out a long breath and ended the call. He stood there for a moment, composing himself, adjusting his collar, putting the mask of the loving husband back in place. He was preparing to turn around and smile at me, to hand me death in a crystal glass and watch me swallow it. I looked at his back, and I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. I was not going to die tonight. I was not going to be the tragic accident in tomorrow's newspaper. I was going to be the one thing he had not calculated for. I was going to be the witness, the judge, and the jury, survival mode engaged. It was not a conscious choice. It was a biological imperative. My posture shifted. My spine straightened. The tears that had threatened to spill only moments ago evaporated, burned away by a sudden, intense heat in my chest. I watched him turn around. His face was composed, his smile practiced. "Sorry about that," he said, walking toward me. "Work emergency. You know how it is." "I know exactly how it is," I said. My voice was steady, too steady. He did not notice. He was too focused on the glass in my hand. "Shall we?" he asked, raising his own drink. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a dead man walking. He just didn't know it yet. I tightened my grip on the glass, my mind already racing through the variables, the options, the counter-moves. "Yes," I said, and I stepped out of the shadows. "Let's toast." Grant stepped back into the circle of light cast by the living room lamps, his face arranged into a mask of eager anticipation. He moved toward me not like a husband approaching his wife of 5 years, but like a gambler approaching the roulette table when the ball is about to drop into the winning slot. He extended his hand to touch the base of my glass, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was cold, clammy with a nervous sweat that betrayed the composure of his smile. He was looking at the cocktail in my hand with a hunger that had nothing to do with thirst. He was looking at it as if the liquid inside were liquid gold, or a winning lottery ticket that would erase his debts and buy him a new life with the woman whose voice I had just heard on the phone. "You know," he said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat, "I forgot the cocktail napkins. I made a mess of the rim with the lemon twist. It is too sticky. Hold on. Do not drink yet. I want it to be perfect." He set his own glass down on the small, wrought iron table between us. It sat there, identical to mine in every way. The same crystal cut, the same pale, shimmering liquid, the same delicate twist of lemon peel curling like a serpent in the glass. "I will be right back," he said, already turning toward the sliding glass door. 2 seconds. He walked away, leaving me alone on the balcony. He was giving me space. It was a calculated retreat. He wanted to create a gap in his observation, a moment of privacy where I would feel comfortable taking that first, costly sip without his eyes burning into me. He wanted to step back just long enough for me to relax, to get careless, so he could return and find me already taking the bait. I watched his silhouette disappear into the kitchen. The moment the sliding door clicked shut, the clock in my head started ticking. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury for people who do not have to solve problems in real time. I work in fraud investigation. I deal with timed audits and disappearing paper trails. This was just another high-pressure audit. Only the asset at risk was me. I looked at the table. 2 glasses. The one in my hand was the weapon. The one on the table was the control. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my hands were steady. I had perhaps 10 seconds before he returned. 10 seconds to make a choice that would define whether I woke up tomorrow morning or became a statistic on a coroner's report. Fear whispered in my ear, telling me to throw the drink over the railing, to run, to scream. But intelligence, cold and sharp as a scalpel, cut through the noise. If I threw the drink, he would know I knew. He would panic. A panicked man is dangerous and unpredictable. He might attack me physically. He might try again later. I needed him to believe his plan was working. I needed him to feel safe until the trap snapped shut around his own neck. I moved with the fluid precision of a magician. I placed my glass on the table next to his. They were dangerously close. For a fraction of a second, I lost track of which was which. A terrifying blink of confusion. But I focused. Left was mine. Right was his. The poison was on the left. I reached out. My fingers light and sure. I lifted the glass on the right, his safe drink, and moved it to the left position. I took the glass on the left, the lethal dose, and slid it to the right. The switch took less than 2 seconds, but that was not enough. I am a forensic auditor. I know that the devil is in the details. The condensation rings on the table, the fingerprints on the glass. If he had touched his glass, his prints would be on the right. If I handed him the glass that I had been holding, my prints would be on it. I grabbed a sheer decorative scarf I had draped over the chair earlier that evening. With 2 rapid circular motions, I wiped the bowl and the stem of the glass now sitting on the right, the poisoned one. I wiped the rim where my lips might have theoretically hovered. Then, I quickly grasped the stem of the safe glass, now on the left, and held it, pressing my thumb against the crystal to establish ownership. To warm the glass slightly so it felt held. I checked the table surface. The condensation rings overlapped slightly, wet and indistinguishable in the dim light. Perfect. I heard the heavy thud of the refrigerator door closing inside. He was coming back. I picked up the safe glass, my new drink, and stepped back to my original position by the railing. I adopted the pose of a woman enjoying the view. Relaxed, unsuspecting. My pulse was roaring in my ears, loud enough that I feared he might hear it. But my face was a blank slate. The sliding door opened. Grant stepped out, holding a small stack of paper napkins. "Sorry about that," he said, breathless. "Could not find the good linen ones." He looked at the table. He looked at the single glass sitting there. Then he looked at me. Holding the other glass, he did not blink. He did not frown. He saw exactly what he expected to see. His wife holding the drink he had prepared for her. He walked over to the table and picked up the remaining glass. The glass I had just wiped clean. The glass containing the anniversary spark, laced with whatever chemical cocktail he and his mistress had cooked up to stop my heart. "Here," he said, handing me a napkin, "for the condensation." "Thank you," I said. My voice was surprisingly normal, soft, grateful. Grant raised his glass. The moonlight caught the liquid, making it glow with a sinister beauty. He was smiling, and this time, the smile reached his eyes. It was a look of pure relief. He thought the hard part was over. He thought the execution was secure. "To us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To 5 years, and to the future, I promise you, Haley, everything is going to be different from now on." I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the greed, the weakness, the betrayal. I saw the man who had promised to love and cherish me, now standing there waiting for me to die so he could cash a check. "To our future," I echoed. I raised my glass. Grant did not hesitate. He was so confident, so arrogant in his design. He tipped his head back and drank. He did not just sip. He took a large, enthusiastic swallow, draining nearly half the glass in one go. He was celebrating. He was tasting victory. He was drinking his own murder weapon. I brought my glass to my lips. I let the cool liquid touch my skin. I inhaled the scent of the gin and elderflower. I tilted the glass just enough to wet my top lip, to make it look real. Then, with the timing of a seasoned actress, I lowered the glass, swallowing nothing but my own saliva. "Delicious," I said. "You really outdid yourself, Grant." He lowered his glass, licking his lips. "I am glad you like it," he said. "I really am." He set his glass down on the table, satisfied. He looked at me with a strange tenderness. the pity of a butcher for the lamb. He expected me to collapse. He expected me to clutch my chest, to gasp for air, to fade away so he could call 911 and play the grieving widower. I took a step toward him, staring at his face, searching for the first signs. Was it fast acting? Was it slow? I did not know what he had used, but I knew exactly where it was now. It was coursing through his veins, pumping toward his heart, carried by the very blood he thought was so superior to mine. I smiled at him. It was the sharpest, coldest smile I had ever worn. "You have no idea," I whispered to myself, "how different the future is going to be." I looked at him like a stranger in my house. Tonight, I would not die. Tonight, the balance sheet had been corrected, and he would never understand why the math had turned against him. The dinner that followed was a masterclass in deception, a grotesque piece of theater performed for an audience of none. We sat across from each other at the candlelit table, the remains of the meal cooling on our plates. Grant was talking, filling the silence with a stream of nostalgia that felt rehearsed. He spoke of our first trip to the coast, of the way the sunlight had hit the water, of the specific song that had been playing on the radio when he proposed. Every sentence was dipped in saccharine sweetness, designed to lull me into a state of emotional vulnerability. He was building the narrative of a loving husband treating his wife to a perfect final evening. I sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the role of the cherished spouse. I laughed softly at the right moments. I reached across the table to squeeze his hand when his voice wavered with manufactured emotion. But inside, I was a stone. My mind was a split screen. On one side, I was engaging in this charade. On the other, I was tracking the passage of time with the precision of a stopwatch. It had been 20 minutes since we finished the cocktails. Grant cut a piece of steak, his knife scraping against the porcelain. The sound was sharp, grating. He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of weakness. He was waiting for a slur in my speech, a drooping eyelid, a hand clutching at the chest. He was waiting for the poison to take hold so he could begin the next phase of his plan. "You look beautiful tonight, Haley," he said, but his gaze was clinical. He was not looking at my dress. He was looking at my pupils, checking for dilation. "Thank you, darling," I replied, keeping my voice steady and bright. "I feel wonderful, better than I have in months. Actually, this dinner was exactly what I needed." A flicker of confusion passed through his eyes. He checked his watch again. It was a subtle glance, a flick of the wrist, but I saw it, according to whatever timetable the woman on the phone had given him. I should have been fading by now. The fact that I was sitting there, radiant and alert, was a variable he had not accounted for. "I am glad," he said, but the words lacked their earlier conviction. Then it started. It began with a tremor. Grant reached for his water glass, and his hand shook. It was a fine, high-frequency vibration that caused the water to ripple against the glass rim. He set it down quickly, his brow furrowing. He rubbed his temples with his fingertips, closing his eyes for a brief second. "Is everything all right?" I asked, leaning forward with feigned concern. "You look a little pale, Grant." He waved a hand dismissively. "I am fine, just a little tired. It has been a long week at the office. The heat in here is a bit much, don't you think?" "It feels perfectly comfortable to me," I said, taking a deliberate sip of water. "Maybe you are coming down with something." He tried to smile, but the muscles in his face seemed to lag, as if the signal from his brain was getting lost on the way to his jaw. A sheen of sweat broke out across his forehead, glistening in the candlelight. It was not the warm glow of a man in love. It was the cold, clammy perspiration of a body in distress. Grant stared at me. The confusion in his eyes was morphing into fear. He looked at my plate, then at his own. He looked at the empty cocktail glasses sitting on the sideboard where he had moved them. The realization was a slow, creeping horror. He knew the dosage, he knew the timeline, and he knew that the only person in the room who was sweating and trembling was him. He started to speak, but his voice caught. He coughed, a dry hacking sound. I think I need to lie down, just for a moment. He tried to push his chair back and stand up. It should have been a simple motion. Instead, his legs refused to cooperate. He stumbled, his knees buckling under his weight. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing, dragging the tablecloth with him. The silverware clattered loudly against the wood. The candles flickered violently. "Grant!" I stood up, but I did not rush to him. I stayed on my side of the table, watching. "Grant, what is happening?" He was breathing heavily now, short, shallow gasps, like a fish out of water. His left hand flew to his chest, clutching the fabric of his shirt. The irony was absolute. He had told his mistress it would look like a cardiac event. He had purchased a script for my death, and now he was forced to perform it himself. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. He wanted to speak. I could see the words forming on his lips. He wanted to scream that he had been poisoned. He wanted to demand I call an ambulance and tell them exactly what toxin was in his blood. But he couldn't. To admit he was poisoned was to admit he had brought the poison into the house. To accuse me was to confess his own attempted murder. He was trapped in a prison of his own making. "I can't breathe," he wheezed, his face turning a chaotic shade of gray. He slumped forward, his upper body hitting the table with a heavy thud. He was conscious, but his motor control was failing rapidly. He looked at his phone, sitting just inches from his hand. He wanted to reach for it. He wanted to call the woman, or the hospital, or anyone, but his fingers just twitched uselessly against the wood. Now was the time. I moved around the table, dropping to my knees beside him. I put my hands on his shoulders, my grip firm. I let my voice rise an octave, infusing it with the frantic energy of a terrified wife. "Grant! Oh my God! Grant, talk to me!" I shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the walls. "Grant, stay with me!" He looked up at me, and for the first time, the mask was completely gone. There was no arrogance left. Only the raw, primal fear of a man realizing he has lost everything. He knew, in that moment, staring into my eyes, he knew I had switched the glasses. He tried to speak, perhaps to beg, but all that came out was a strangled groan. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not fumble. I dialed 911 with steady fingers, then switched my voice into performance mode. "Emergency," the operator answered. "Please help me," I screamed into the receiver, channeling every ounce of adrenaline in my body into the performance. "It is my husband. He has collapsed. I think he is having a heart attack. Please, hurry." "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. What is the address?" I gave the address, my voice trembling perfectly. We were just having dinner for our anniversary, and he stood up and grabbed his chest, and he can't breathe. He is sweating and he can't talk. "Please send someone." I described the symptoms exactly as he had listed them on the balcony. Stroke, cardiac arrest. Sudden onset. I was painting a picture for the paramedics before they even arrived. I was ensuring that when they walked in, they would see exactly what I told them to see. Grant listened to me making the call. He heard me describe his own trap. A single tear leaked from the corner of his eye and tracked through the sweat on his cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, impotent rage. "It is okay, baby," I whispered to him, stroking his hair with one hand while holding the phone with the other. My voice was tender, loving, and terrifyingly final. "Help is coming. Just hold on. I am right here." He tried to push me away, but his arm was as weak as a child's. I held him there, playing the role of the devoted savior, watching the light in his eyes dim as the chemistry took over. The deadline he had set for me had passed. The new timeline belonged to me. The sterile, fluorescent glare of the emergency room was a violent contrast to the warm, candlelit ambiance of the apartment we had just left. The air here smelled of antiseptic, latex, and old coffee, stripping away the romance of our anniversary and replacing it with the cold, hard machinery of survival. Grant was behind a curtain in the trauma bay. hooked up to monitors that beeped with a frantic, irregular rhythm. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, clutching my purse. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the residual adrenaline of the performance. I had ridden in the ambulance with him, holding his hand, weeping softly whenever the paramedic looked my way, while silently noting his vitals. The paramedic had frowned at the monitor more than once. The heart rate was erratic, the blood pressure bottoming out in a way that did not align with a standard myocardial infarction. A doctor emerged from behind the curtain, pulling a mask down from his face. He looked tired. He approached me with a clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Morgan," he said. His voice was grave. "I am Dr. Evans. We have stabilized your husband for the moment, but his presentation is unusual." I stood up, widening my eyes to simulate panic. "Is he going to be okay? Is it a heart attack? He's only 38. He runs. He eats well." "That is the thing, Doctor," Evans said, glancing at his notes. "The EKG shows stress, but the blood work we just ran is showing markers that suggest toxicity. It looks less like a blockage and more like a reaction to a foreign substance. Did your husband take anything tonight? Any medication, recreational drugs, or supplements?" This was the opening. The door was cracked, and I kicked it wide open. "No," I said, shaking my head vehemently. "Nothing like that. We were just having dinner. He made us cocktails. He was so proud of them. He called it the anniversary spark." I paused, letting a flicker of confusion cross my face. "He made 2. One for him, one for me. We drank them at the same time." I let the implication hang there. If there was poison in the system, and it came from the drinks, then I was a potential victim too. "Doctor." Evans looked at me sharply. "You drank the same thing?" "Yes," I lied. "Well, I only had about half of mine. I felt a little lightheaded, but I thought it was just the alcohol. Is it possible? Could the alcohol have been bad? Or maybe something he put in it?" "We will need to run a toxicology screen on you as well, just to be safe." "Doctor," Evans said, his demeanor shifting from delivering bad news to managing a potential public health incident. "If there was a contaminant in the ingredients, you might be at risk." "Please," I said, offering him my arm. "Anything. I just want him to be okay." By volunteering to be tested, I removed myself from the suspect list and placed myself firmly on the victim list. When my blood work came back clean, it would simply look like I had been lucky, or that Grant's metabolism had reacted differently, or perhaps, and this was the seed I wanted to plant, that the poison was only in his glass. While the nurses drew a vial of my blood, 2 police officers arrived. It is standard procedure for hospitals to notify the police when a healthy man collapses from suspected poisoning. One was a uniformed officer, but the other introduced himself as Detective Vance. He had the tired eyes of a man who had seen too many domestic disputes gone wrong. "Mrs. Morgan," Detective Vance said, taking out a notepad. "I am sorry to disturb you, but we need to understand what happened tonight." I took a deep breath, dabbing at my dry eyes with a tissue. "It was our 5th anniversary," I began. My voice was trembling, but my narrative was linear and clear. Grant wanted to surprise me. He cooked dinner. He made the drinks. He was acting. Intense. Nervous. "Nervous?" Vance asked, looking up. "How so?" "He kept checking the time," I said. "He was sweating before we even started eating. He kept saying tonight was going to change everything, that our future would be different." "Did he seem depressed? Suicidal?" "No," I said quickly. "Not suicidal. Desperate. He has been under so much pressure lately." I lowered my voice, looking around as if I were sharing a shameful family secret. "The money. We have some debt. Significant debt. Grant made some bad investments without telling me. He owes money to people who are not banks, private lenders. He was terrified they were coming for him." Vance stopped writing. "Loan sharks?" "I do not know what they are called," I whispered. "But he mentioned an insurance policy. He said something about a payout clearing the slate. I told him we could work through it, but he was so fixated on a quick fix. I saw the shift in Vance's eyes. The narrative was changing from accidental food poisoning to something darker. A man in debt, a desperate need for an insurance payout, a sudden collapse. I had just handed him a motive for a staged event that went wrong, or perhaps a suicide attempt masked as an accident to claim the premium. "We will need to look into those finances," Vance said, closing his notebook. "Do you have access to his accounts?" "I think so," I said. "He handles the money, but I can try to find the papers." Vance nodded and stepped away to speak to the doctor. The chaos of the ER provided the perfect cover. Grant was still unconscious, heavily sedated to manage the seizures that had started in the ambulance. His personal effects, his wallet, his watch, his phone, were in a clear plastic bag on the counter near his bed. I stood up, telling the nurse I needed to use the restroom. Instead, I walked over to the bag. The nurses were busy with a trauma case that had just rolled in. I had 10 seconds. I slipped Grant's phone out of the bag. I knew his passcode. He had changed it 3 months ago, but I had seen him type it in from a reflection in the kitchen window weeks ago. 1984. I unlocked the phone. My fingers flew across the screen. I did not need to read the messages. I needed to preserve them. I went to the cloud settings and triggered an immediate backup. I forwarded the call logs and the text thread with the number he had called on the balcony to my own secure work email. I found the banking app, took screenshots of the transfers to an account labeled TR, and sent those too. Then, I found the digital copy of the life insurance policy. It had been modified 2 weeks ago. The beneficiary was still me, but the payout clauses had been adjusted to include double indemnity for accidental death. I deleted the sent emails from his sent folder, wiped the recent apps history, and slid the phone back into the plastic bag just as a nurse turned the corner. "Mrs. Morgan?" she asked. "You should not be touching those." "I am sorry," I said, clutching my chest. "I just wanted to hold his hand, but I cannot reach him." She softened. "It is okay. Go sit down. The doctor says he is waking up." I returned to the bedside. Grant was stirring. The sedatives were wearing off, and the reality of his survival was crashing in on him. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. His eyes were bloodshot. Unfocused at first. He looked at the ceiling tiles, then at the IV tubes running into his arm. He tried to move, but his limbs were heavy. Then, he turned his head and saw me. I was sitting right beside him, holding his hand. The look that passed over his face was not relief. It was a cocktail of pure, unadulterated horror. He remembered the drink. He remembered the switch. He realized that the poison he had bought for me was currently circulating in his own blood. He tried to pull his hand away, but he was too weak. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was raw from the intubation tube they had briefly considered using. "Haley," he rasped, the name sounding like a curse. I leaned in close, brushing a lock of sweat-dampened hair from his forehead, to the police officer standing by the door and the nurse checking the monitors. It looked like a tender moment between a wife and her recovering husband. "Shh," I whispered, my lips brushing his ear. "You are okay. Grant, you made it." His eyes widened. He heard the double meaning. "You made it. You made the drink. You made this happen." "The police are here," I continued, my voice a soothing melody of threats. "They are very interested in your debts, and the insurance policy, and the special drink you made for us. I told them we both drank it. I told them you were just trying to fix our future." Grant stared at me, his chest heaving. He realized the trap. If he told them I switched the glasses, he would have to explain why one glass was lethal. If he said nothing, the investigation would follow the money, the debts, and the attempted suicide narrative I was spinning. "Why?" he croaked. "Because I love you," I said, smiling loud enough for the detective to see. "And I am going to take care of everything, just like you wanted." I squeezed his hand, digging my nails into his palm just enough to hurt. He closed his eyes, defeated. He was alive, but his life as he knew it was over. The nightmare he had planned for me had just become his reality. The door clicked shut behind the nurse, leaving a heavy pressurized silence in its wake. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. A digital metronome counting down the seconds of Grant's fading control. The privacy curtain was drawn, isolating us in a small, sterile cube of white linen and stainless steel. Grant lay propped up against the pillows, his skin the color of wet ash. The IV line snaked from his arm like a clear tether, pumping saline and anti-seizure medication into his veins. He looked small. The arrogance that had defined him on the balcony, the swagger of a man who thought he had committed the perfect crime, had evaporated. In its place was the raw, trembling fear of a trapped animal. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His throat worked as he swallowed, his voice coming out as a jagged whisper that sounded like it was being dragged over gravel. "What did you do with the glasses, Haley?" It was the question that had been eating him alive since he woke up. He needed to know the mechanics of his failure. He needed to know if I had simply swapped them, if I had known all along, if I had watched him drink his own death sentence with a smile on my face. I pulled my chair closer to the bed, the metal legs scraping softly against the linoleum. I kept my face open, concerned, devoid of the malice I felt burning in my gut. "I did not do anything, Grant," I lied, my voice smooth and confused. "Doctor, Evan said we were both affected. He thinks it might have been a reaction to the elderflower liqueur, or maybe the gin was tainted. He said I was just lucky. My system processed it faster. Or maybe I drank less than you did." I saw the confusion war with suspicion in his eyes. He wanted to believe me. He needed to believe me. Because the alternative, that his wife was a step ahead of him in a murder plot, was too terrifying to contemplate in his weakened state. But the doubt lingered. He knew he had put the poison in only one glass. "That is impossible," he muttered, closing his eyes. "I measured it. I was careful." "You were nervous," I corrected him gently. "I saw your hands shaking." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, bringing up the video I had recorded on the balcony. I held it in front of his face, forcing him to watch. "Look at yourself, Grant," I said softly. On the small screen, the video played. There he was, back turned to the camera, shoulders hunched, mixing the drinks with frantic, jerky movements. Then the moment where he turned around, shielding the phone call. Then the moment he handed me the glass. The camera angle was damning. It showed him in complete control of the preparation. It showed him handing a drink to his wife. It showed him toasting. "Do you see what the police will see if they look at this?" I asked, my tone shifting from wife to legal counsel. "They will see a man with massive debt, a man who just increased his life insurance policy, handing a drink to his wife on the night of their anniversary, a drink that turned out to be toxic." Grant stared at the screen, his breathing hitching. The visual evidence stripped away his denial. He looked guilty because he was guilty. "I did not mean for this to happen," he whimpered. It was the pathetic plea of a child caught stealing, not a man who had planned a cold-blooded murder. "I know," I said, leaning in until my face was inches from his. "But Detective Vance does not know that he is outside right now. Grant, he is asking about your bank transfers. He is asking about the loan sharks. If the toxicology report comes back saying there was a lethal agent in your blood, and they trace it back to a glass you poured, you are finished." I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the word "finished" settle on his chest. "They will charge you with attempted murder," I continued, relentless. "They will say you tried to poison me to get the insurance money. But you messed up and poisoned yourself. You will go to prison for 20 years. Grant, you will die in a cell." Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks. He was breaking. It sat there, identical to mine in every way. The same crystal cut, the same pale, shimmering liquid, the same delicate twist of lemon peel curling like a serpent in the glass. The fear of prison, of public humiliation, of the complete destruction of his life, was drowning out whatever instinct he had left to guard his secrets. "Help me," he whispered. "Haley, please, you have to help me." This was the moment. I had peeled him down to the raw nerve, frightened him, boxed him in. Now I would offer him a lifeline, one he'd grab without realizing it was also a thread I could tug later. "I want to help you," I said, squeezing his hand. "I do not want my husband in jail. I do not want to be the wife of a murderer. We have to fix this story before the police come back in." I glanced at the door, making sure we were still alone, then lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "We can't say you mixed it," I said. "That puts the blame squarely on you. We need a third party. We need to say the ingredients were compromised before they ever entered our house. We need to say someone gave you something, and you didn't know what it was." Grant looked at me, hope flickering in his dull eyes. I was offering him a narrative where he was a victim, not a killer. A narrative where he was just a gullible fool, not a monster. "Who gave it to you? Grant?" I asked. My voice was soft, almost hypnotic. It was the tone of a confessor, a safe harbor. "I cannot protect you if I do not know the source. Who gave you the vial?" He hesitated. His eyes darted to the side, his old instinct to lie flaring up one last time, but the pressure was too great. The video, the police, the hospital. It was all too much. He needed me to save him. "It was a woman," he breathed. "Who?" I pressed. "I need a name. If we are going to say she tricked you, I need to know who she is." "Tessa," he said. The name fell from his lips like a stone. "Tessa who?" "Tessa Thorne," he answered. "She works at the Aura Wellness Clinic on 4th Street. She is a nutritionist there. She said it would be undetectable. She said it mimics a cardiac event." "Did she sell it to you?" I asked, cementing the transaction. "Yes," Grant admitted. $5,000, cash. She said it was a custom compound. She promised it was safe, for the person who did not drink it. I nodded slowly, absorbing the information. Tessa Thorne, Aura Wellness Clinic, 4th Street. I had the name, I had the location, I had the accomplice. "Okay," I said, patting his hand. "Listen to me closely. Here is what we are going to do. You are not going to say anything to the police yet. You are going to say you are too confused, too groggy. Let me handle Detective Vance. I will tell him that we think the gin might have been tampered with at the store, or that maybe we had a bad reaction to some supplements. We will buy time." "And Tessa?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Leave Tessa to me." I said, "If she gave you something that almost killed you, she is a liability. We cannot let her talk. I will figure out how to handle her. You just stay quiet. Do you understand? If you speak, we both lose." "I understand," Grant said. He looked at me with gratitude, profound and sickening. He actually thought I was on his side. He thought I was the loyal wife cleaning up his mess, standing by her man despite his mistake. "Good," I said. "Rest now. I will go talk to the detective." I stood up and smoothed my dress. I looked down at him one last time. He looked peaceful now, reassured by my lies. He had no idea that I had just handed him a shovel and told him to start digging, while I held the map to where the bodies were buried. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking softly on the floor. My face was a mask of worry for the benefit of anyone watching through the glass. But inside, I was cold steel. Tessa Thorne, I had the bait. Now it was time to go fishing. I returned to the room with a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand and a look of manufactured distress plastered across my face. Grant was watching the door, his eyes darting back and forth like a metronome set to a high tempo. He needed reassurance. I was about to give him panic. "Grant," I said, keeping my voice low and urgent. "I just got off the phone with your mother. She heard about the ambulance." Grant groaned, letting his head fall back against the pillow. "Oh God. Darlene, she will make this a circus." "It is worse than that," I said, stepping closer to the bed and lowering the bed rail so nothing stood between us. "She is on her way to the apartment right now. She says she wants to pick up some clothes for you and clean up the kitchen so you do not have to come home to a mess." The color drained from Grant's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. His breath hitched. He knew exactly what was in that kitchen: the empty vial, the extra ingredients, the physical residue of his attempt to murder me. If his mother, a woman with a nose for scandal like a bloodhound has for a scent, found them, she might not understand what they were, but she would certainly keep them, or worse, she might hand them to the police who were inevitably going to search the place. "She cannot go in there," Grant hissed, trying to sit up but failing as his weakened muscles betrayed him. "The vial, it is still on the counter, next to the sink." "I know," I said, playing the role of the frantic accomplice. "And the police are already suspicious. If Darlene lets them in, or if she finds it and mentions it, Grant, we have to get rid of it before she gets there." "I cannot leave," he said, panic rising in his voice. "I am stuck here." "But Tessa isn't," I suggested, dropping the name like a lifeline that was actually an anchor. "She is the only one who knows what it is. She can get in, grab it, and leave before your mother arrives. It is the only way." Grant hesitated. Bringing Tessa to the crime scene was risky, but leaving the murder weapon on the counter for his mother to find was fatal. He looked at me, desperate for guidance. "Do it," I urged. "Text her. Tell her it is an emergency. Tell her to just run in, grab the small glass vial, and throw it in a dumpster 3 blocks away. Tell her to say she is the house cleaner if anyone asks." Grant nodded, fumbling for his phone on the tray table. His fingers shook as he typed. I watched him, memorizing the keystrokes. He was texting Tessa Thorne. He was creating a digital paper trail that linked him, his mistress, and the murder weapon in a single, time-stamped thread. "Sent," he breathed, dropping the phone. "She is 10 minutes away. She has the door code." "Good," I said. "I will go make sure the nurses do not disturb you. We just need to sit tight." I walked out of the room, my heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum. I did not go to the nurses' station. I went to the quietest corner of the waiting room, near the vending machines, where the security camera had a perfect, unobstructed view of me. I bought a bottle of water, took a sip, and made a call. But I did not call Darlene. I called the concierge desk at our apartment building. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound like a worried wife. "This is Haley Morgan in 6B. I am at the hospital with Grant. Look, we are very worried. Grant is confused from the medication, and he thinks he might have accidentally texted our door code to a stranger. I am terrified someone is going to try to rob us while we are gone." "That is terrible, Mrs. Morgan," Mr. Henderson replied, his voice instantly professional. "Do you want me to change the code?" "No," I said quickly. "There is not time. But if anyone who is not family tries to enter the apartment, especially a woman, please stop them. Hold them there. We want to press charges if someone tries to break in. It is a matter of police record." "Understood," he said. "I will watch the monitors personally." I hung up and sat down on the plastic bench. I opened a magazine and pretended to read. I checked the clock on the wall. It was 8:45 in the evening. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the mouse to smell the cheese. 20 minutes later, my phone did not ring. Grant's did. I was back in the room, sitting by his side, holding his hand like a devoted spouse. The phone buzzed on the tray table. Grant snatched it up, expecting a confirmation text from Tessa saying the deed was done. Instead, he answered a call. I watched his face. It went from anxious to horrified in the span of 3 seconds. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He listened for a moment longer, then lowered the phone slowly, staring at the wall as if he could see through it to the prison cell awaiting him. "What is it?" I asked, squeezing his hand. "Is it Tessa? Did she get it?" Grant swallowed hard. "She is being held by building security. Mr. Henderson stopped her at the door." "Oh no," I whispered, feigning shock. Did she say she was the cleaner? She tried, Grant said, his voice hollow. But the police were already there. They were doing a perimeter check because of the ambulance call earlier. They asked to see her phone to verify she was an employee. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. The text message. Haley. The message I sent her. It popped up on her lock screen while the officer was holding it. Emergency. Trash the vial in the kitchen. Police coming. I felt a surge of triumph so potent it almost made me dizzy. It was perfect. The digital evidence. The accomplice caught at the scene. The instructions to destroy evidence. It was a heist movie where the bank robbers locked themselves in the vault. They have her, Grant whispered. They are arresting her right now. She is screaming my name. He gripped my hand, his nails digging into my skin. Haley, they are going to come for me. They know. They know everything. I looked at him. I did not pull away. I leaned in close, my face inches from his, my eyes locking onto his terrified gaze. I needed one last nail in the coffin. I needed him to confess to the police, not just to me. Grant, listen to me, I said, my voice intense and commanding. There is no way out of this lie anymore. If you keep denying it, they will think you are the mastermind and she is just the pawn. They will give you life without parole. I brushed a tear from his cheek, a gesture of tenderness that was actually a Judas kiss. Do not be afraid, I whispered. Just tell the truth. Tell them she gave it to you. Tell them you were manipulated. It is the only way to save her, and the only way to save yourself. If you confess first, you control the story. Grant nodded. Sobbing openly now, he was broken. He saw me as his only ally in a world that was rapidly closing in on him. He did not realize that I was the one who had closed the walls. I will tell them, he choked out. I will tell them everything. I sat back. Releasing his hand, I watched him weep. A man defeated by his own greed and a wife who refused to be a victim. I picked up my water bottle and took a long, cool sip. The show was almost over. All that was left was the curtain call. If the silence in the hospital room had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, Darlene Morgan was the hurricane that ripped it to shreds. My mother-in-law did not enter a room. She invaded it. She arrived 40 minutes after I had orchestrated Tessa's arrest, and her entrance was a masterclass in performative grief weaponized as aggression. The double doors to the ward swung open with a violence that made the nurse at the station jump. Darlene marched down the hallway, her heels clicking against the linoleum like gunfire. She was wearing a fur coat despite the mild weather, a garment that smelled of mothballs and expensive, stale perfume. Her makeup was slightly smeared, likely a calculated touch to suggest a mother frantic with worry, but her eyes were dry and sharp as flint. "Where is he?" she shrieked, ignoring the quiet please signs. "Where is my son?" She spotted me standing outside Grant's room, where I had been speaking quietly with a nurse, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She did not hug me. She did not ask if I was okay. She lunged. "You!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "This is your fault. I knew you were a bad omen the day he brought you home. You are poison. Haley, you are absolute poison." The nurse stepped between us, her hands raised. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice. This is a hospital. Do not tell me what to do," Darlene snapped, pushing past her. "My son is dying because of her incompetence as a wife. If she took better care of him, he would not be in a hospital bed." I stood perfectly still. In the past, I would have defended myself. I would have explained, apologized, tried to smooth things over to keep the peace, but the peace was dead. I was currently fighting a war, and in war, you let the enemy reveal their position. I looked at the floor, letting my shoulders slump, playing the role of the battered, traumatized wife. I let the nurses see her cruelty. I let the other patients peering out of their rooms see a grieving wife being attacked by a monster. "I am sorry, Darlene," I whispered, just loud enough for the witnesses to hear. I am just glad he is alive. Alive? She spat. He is ruined. Do you know the stress he is under? She shoved past me and stormed into the room. I followed her, keeping my distance. Grant was awake, looking pale and terrified. When he saw his mother, he did not look relieved. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the wooden spoon. "Mother," he croaked. "Look at you," Darlene said, not with pity, but with disgust. She stood over him, her hands on her hips. "A total mess. I told you to be careful." I stepped forward. "I am going to step out for a moment," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to call the lawyer about the situation with the police. I want to make sure Grant is protected." I walked over to the bedside table to grab my purse. As I did, I discreetly slid my phone out. I had already opened the voice memo app. I tapped the record button and placed the phone face down on the table, half hidden under a pile of discharge paperwork and plastic water cups. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Darlene was too focused on her son, and Grant was too focused on his mother to notice a black rectangle blending into the shadows. "I will just get some coffee," I said. "I will be right back." I walked out, closing the door until it clicked shut. I did not go to the coffee machine. I walked to the waiting area around the corner, sat down, and put on my wireless earbuds. I had synced them to the phone before I left the room. The range was limit testing the Bluetooth connection. But as the static cleared, their voices came through, tinny, but audible. What I heard froze the blood in my veins. I expected Darlene to ask what happened. I expected her to ask about his health. I even expected her to ask if he had really tried to kill me. "Did you sign the papers?" Darlene asked. Her voice was dropped low, stripped of the theatrical hysteria she had displayed in the hallway. It was businesslike, cold. "Yes," Grant whispered. 2 weeks ago, the double indemnity clause was active." "Then how did you mess this up so badly?" Darlene hissed. "I told you, Grant. I told you specifically. It has to look natural. A heart attack at 38 is suspicious but passable if you have the medical history fabricated first. Did you plant the blood pressure medication in the cabinet like I said?" I sat up straight on the plastic bench, my hand flying to my mouth. I forgot," Grant stammered. "I was focused on the drink. Tessa said the compound would mimic a stroke perfectly. I thought that was enough." "Tessa is an amateur," Darlene scoffed. "And you are a fool. You rely too much on other people. Your father never needed a Tessa when we dealt with his business partner in 1998. He handled it himself. He made sure the brakes were faulty, and he made sure he was 3 towns away when it happened." My stomach turned over. I felt bile rise in my throat. I had thought I was dealing with a desperate man who had made a singular, terrible choice out of financial panic. I thought I was the victim of a husband who had lost his way. I was wrong. I was not just married to a murderer. I had married into a crime syndicate. "I tried, Mom," Grant whined. "She switched the glasses. I swear. She knows." "Of course she knows now." "You idiot," Darlene snapped. "But does she have proof? Real proof?" "She has a video," Grant said, "of me mixing the drinks, and she has the texts to Tessa." There was a silence on the line. I could imagine Darlene's face, calculating, strategizing. "Listen to me," Darlene said, her voice hard as iron. "Haley is soft. She is weak. She is trying to scare you. If she really wanted you in jail, you would be there already. She is probably trying to leverage this for a divorce settlement. We can handle her." "She is not soft, Mom," Grant said, and for the first time, I heard genuine fear in his voice regarding me. "You did not see her eyes. She watched me drink it. She watched me die, Mom, and she smiled." "Then she is dangerous," Darlene corrected herself immediately. "Which means we have to strike first. We cannot let her control the narrative. If she has evidence, we have to discredit it. We have to discredit her." "How?" "You said she gave you the drink, right? In your statement to the police?" "No," Grant said. "She made me tell them Tessa gave it to me. She tricked me into confessing about Tessa." You remain an idiot, Darlene sighed. Fine, Tessa is collateral damage. She goes down, but we need to sever the link to you, and we need to put the suspicion back on Haley. Who has the debt? Grant? I do. No, Darlene said. We do. But who manages the household finances? You can say she was the one pushing for the money. You can say she was the one who found Tessa. You were just the husband who followed instructions because you trusted your wife. But the texts came from my phone. Because she used your phone, Darlene improvised instantly. She knows your passcode. She used your phone to set you up. She mixed the drinks. She tried to poison you to get the insurance money because she found out about the debt and wanted out. You are the victim, Grant. Stick to that. Do you think they will believe it? If you cry hard enough, Darlene said. And if I hire the right lawyer, we will paint her as a gold digger. We will say she has been mentally unstable. I will testify that I have seen her act erratic. We will bury her. Grant, just like we buried the others. I pulled the earbuds out, my hands trembling uncontrollably. It was a legacy, a family tradition, his father's partner, who knows who else. They were predators, generations of them, feeding on anyone who got close enough to trust them, and I was just the latest meal that had refused to be digested. I stopped the recording. I saved the file to 3 different cloud locations and emailed it to my secure account. I did not send it to the police, not yet. This was too big for a simple report. This was the nuclear option. If I played it now, Darlene would lawyer up and claim she was just calming a delusional son. I needed them to commit. I needed them to stand in a court of law, under oath, and tell the lies they were currently rehearsing. I needed them to feel safe enough to perjure themselves before I pulled the rug out. I stood up and walked back to the room. I composed my face into a mask of weary defeat. I needed them to think I was breaking. I needed them to think their plan was working. When I opened the door, the conversation stopped instantly. Darlene turned to me, her face composed into a sneer of superiority. Grant looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Did you reach the lawyer? Darlene asked, testing me. No, I said, clutching my phone tight. I got voicemail. I will try again later. I walked over to the table and picked up my phone, sliding it into my purse. Darlene watched me, her eyes narrowing, but she said nothing. She did not know that the device in my pocket held the confession that would dismantle her entire life. Just then, Detective Vance knocked on the doorframe. He walked in, looking stern. Mr. Morgan, he said, we have taken Miss Thorne into custody. She is claiming that you instructed her to destroy evidence. We need to take your formal statement now. Grant looked at the detective. Then he looked at his mother. Darlene gave a barely perceptible nod. A command. Grant took a deep breath. He sat up straighter. The fear in his face was replaced by a look of cold resolve. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Detective, Grant said, his voice steady. I want to change my statement. I was confused earlier. The drugs, they made me foggy. But I remember clearly now. Vance looked at him, pen poised. Go on. It was not me, Grant said, staring right at me with the dead eyes of a shark. It was her, Haley. She knows about the debt. She knows about the insurance. She used my phone to text Tessa. She mixed the drinks. She tried to kill me, detective, and when it didn't work, she tried to frame my mistress to cover her tracks. Darlene let out a gasp, a perfect, theatrical sound of horror. Oh my God, she whispered, clutching her pearls. Haley, how could you? I looked at them, the mother and the son, the predators. They thought they had cornered me. They thought they had flipped the board. I did not scream. I did not argue. I simply looked at Detective Vance, whose eyes were now shifting to me with renewed suspicion. I think, I said, my voice calm, that I should call my lawyer now. I turned and walked out of the room. As I hit the hallway, I allowed myself a small, invisible smile. They had just walked right into the kill zone, and they had no idea that I had the detonator in my pocket. The court of public opinion does not require evidence. It requires a story, and Grant, guided by Darlene's venomous coaching, gave them a blockbuster in the 48 hours following his accusation. The narrative shifted with the speed of a viral infection. Grant was painted as the tragic, gullible husband, a man recovering from a near-death experience, manipulated by a cold, calculating wife who wanted to cash in on his life insurance. His lawyer, a sharp-suited shark hired by Darlene, gave a press statement on the hospital steps. He described me as unnaturally calm during the emergency call. He cited my lack of tears as proof of my guilt. A loving wife does not check her husband's pulse like she is checking a spreadsheet, he told the cameras. She screams. Mrs. Morgan did not scream. The internet devoured it. A thread on a popular crime forum titled "The Ice Queen of the Upper East Side" garnered 2 million views overnight. An anonymous article appeared on a gossip site, citing close family friends, claiming I had a history of mental instability and had been isolating Grant from his mother for years. It was a lie, but it had the texture of truth, because it confirmed what people wanted to believe, that the woman is always the villain. Then came the financial blow. A Justice for Grant crowdfunding page was launched. Ostensibly to cover his medical bills and legal defense, it raised $50,000 in 3 days. The comments section was a cesspool of strangers wishing me prison time. Or worse. My own world began to crumble. On Tuesday morning, I received a call from the managing director at Caldwell and Rook. "Haley," he said, his voice stiff. "Given the nature of the allegations and the media circus, we feel it is best if you take an indefinite administrative leave. We cannot have the firm's integrity questioned." I was suspended. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. I had spent a decade rooting out fraud, and now I was being discarded because a fraudster had successfully pointed a finger at me. I packed a box of my personal items in silence, walked past the staring eyes of my colleagues, and left the building. I did not go home. I went to a short-term rental apartment I had secured under a maiden name, a small studio with blinds that stayed drawn. I did not log onto social media to defend myself. I did not give interviews. I did not cry. I worked. I turned my dining table into a war room. I printed out every lie Grant had told. I printed out the anonymous article and traced the IP address back to a boutique PR firm that Darlene had used for her husband's business crisis 10 years ago. I organized the timeline. I had the ammunition. I just needed the right gun. I had the recording from the balcony, Grant discussing the accident and the payout. I had the text logs, Grant instructing Tessa to destroy the vial. I had the bank transfers, Grant sending $5,000 to Tessa for consulting. I had the insurance policy. The metadata showing the double indemnity clause was added from Grant's laptop. At a time when I was verified to be at a conference in Chicago, and I had the nuclear option, the recording of Darlene in the hospital room, admitting that murdering business partners was a family legacy. I did not post this on Twitter. A tweet is ephemeral. It can be dismissed as a desperate rant. I needed something permanent. I needed credibility. I contacted the Harbor Ledger, a newspaper known for its investigative rigor. I did not just send them a tip. I sent them a fully indexed dossier. I met with their lead crime reporter, a woman named Sarah with eyes as sharp as mine, in a diner 3 towns over. I handed her a flash drive. "Verify everything," I told her. "Do not print a word until you can prove it is true. I want an audit, not a gossip column." It took them 4 days. 4 days of me sitting in the dark, watching Grant play the martyr on daytime talk shows. 4 days of Darlene smiling like a cat who had eaten the canary. Then, on Sunday morning, the story dropped. The headline took up the entire top fold of the front page. "The Anniversary Audit: How a Staged Murder Became a Family Affair." It was devastating. It laid out the timeline in brutal, irrefutable detail. It published the transcript of the balcony call side by side with Grant's police statement. It showed the screenshots of the texts. It traced the money. But the centerpiece was the audio file of Darlene. The paper had uploaded the clip to their website, and it was being played on every news station in the country. You rely too much on other people. Your father never needed a Tessa. He made sure the brakes were faulty. The public reaction was not a wave. It was a tsunami. The Justice for Grant page was taken down for violating terms of service regarding criminal activity. The comments that had called for my head were deleted or replaced by apologies. The PR firm that wrote the hit piece was doxxed and besieged by angry reviews. The police, humiliated by the fact that a newspaper had done their job for them, had no choice but to pivot. Detective Vance called me, his voice tight with embarrassment, to tell me that the charges against me were being dropped and that the investigation was expanding. They were opening cold cases related to Darlene's late husband. They were looking into Grant's previous business dealings. They were charging Darlene with conspiracy and solicitation of murder. Grant was out on bail, staying at Darlene's estate. The article must have hit him like a physical blow. His narrative was not just broken, it was atomized. He was no longer the victim. He was the incompetent son of a crime matriarch, caught on tape admitting to his own incompetence. He did exactly what a desperate, cornered narcissist does. He panicked. I knew he would come. He could not attack the newspaper. He could not attack the police. He needed to attack the source. He needed to make me retract it. He needed to force me to say it was all AI-generated or faked. I parked my car in the underground garage of my lawyer's office building on Tuesday evening. It was a concrete box, echoing and dim. I saw him before he saw me. He was standing by the elevator bank, wearing a hoodie, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. His eyes were wild, darting around the empty space. He was violating the restraining order just by being within 500 feet of me. I did not run. I sat in my locked car and watched him. I picked up my phone and dialed the number Detective Vance had given me for his direct line. He is here, I said calmly. Parking garage on 5th. He is waiting by the elevator. Stay in the car. Haley, Vance said. Units are 2 minutes out. Do not engage. I hung up. I could have driven away. I could have hidden. But I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to know that I was not afraid. I flashed my headlights. Grant jumped. He shielded his eyes against the glare, then recognized my car. A look of twisted relief washed over his face, followed instantly by rage. He started running toward me. Haley, he screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. You ruined everything. You have to fix this. Tell them it is a lie. He reached my car and pounded on the window. Open the door. You owe me. I did everything for us. I looked at him through the glass. He was pathetic. He was banging on the window of a luxury sedan he could no longer afford, screaming at a wife he had tried to kill, demanding loyalty he had never earned. I did not roll down the window. I just pointed a finger toward the entrance ramp. Blue and red lights flooded the garage, bouncing off the concrete pillars like a strobe light in a nightmare. Sirens wailed, short and sharp. 2 cruisers screeched to a halt, blocking the exit. Grant Morgan, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Step away from the vehicle. Put your hands in the air. Grant froze. He looked at the police, then back at me. For a second, I thought he might run. I thought he might try to smash the window. But the fight had left him, the reality of the Harbor Ledger article, the Darlene recording, and now this final, stupid mistake crashed down on him. He slowly raised his hands. He looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading, asking why I hadn't saved him. I looked back at him, my expression unreadable. I mouthed 2 words, clear enough for him to read through the glass. Case closed. Officers swarmed him, spinning him around and slamming him against the hood of my car. I watched them cuff him. I watched them read him his rights. I watched them drag him away, kicking and screaming about how it was all a misunderstanding. I started my engine. The vibration of the car felt good, solid, real. I waited for the police to wave me through. Then I drove up the ramp and out into the city night. The air was crisp. The lights were bright. For the first time in 5 years, I was driving alone, and I had never felt more accompanied by my own strength. The trial of the people versus Grant Morgan and Darlene Morgan did not begin with a bang, but with the suffocating hush of a room anticipating a massacre. The courtroom was packed. The story had become a national obsession. A grim fairy tale about the disintegration of a perfect marriage into a conspiracy of poison and greed. Grant and Darlene sat at the defense table, but they were no longer the polished, superior creatures who had sneered at me in the hospital room. Grant looked hollowed out, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame diminished by months of jail food and terror. Darlene sat rigid, clutching her purse as if it contained the last remnants of her dignity, her eyes darting around the room with the feral intensity of a trapped rat. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. I did not wear black. I wore a suit of crisp, electric blue. I was not mourning a marriage. I was celebrating a survival. The prosecution did not waste time. They opened by playing the recording from the balcony. The courtroom fell into a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. My voice on the tape was barely a whisper, but Grant's voice cut through the air. Amplified by the high-quality speakers, it was cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of humanity. It will look like a stroke or a massive cardiac event. The mix is untraceable. No one will suspect a thing. I watched the jury. 12 strangers recoiled in unison. They looked from the speaker to the man sitting at the defense table. Grant squeezed his eyes shut, unable to face the sound of his own malice. His lawyer tried to object, claiming the recording was obtained without consent, but the judge overruled him immediately, citing the one-party consent laws and the exigent circumstances of self-defense. Then came the defense's turn. Grant's lawyer, a man who seemed to be sweating through his shirt, tried to spin the narrative Darlene had concocted. He argued that I was the mastermind, that I had staged the entire event to frame a loving husband. He called me manipulative. He called me cold. But a narrative cannot survive a collision with hard data. The prosecution laid out the timeline like a trail of breadcrumbs made of iron. They showed the metadata from the insurance policy changes. Authorized by Grant's biometric login, they displayed the text logs where Grant instructed Tessa to trash the vial. They showed the security footage from the hospital lobby, proving I was nowhere near the apartment when Tessa tried to enter. They showed the bank transfers, the debts, the desperate emails from loan sharks threatening Grant's knees. Then, they called Tessa Thorne. Tessa had taken a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she had agreed to testify against the man who had promised her the world and then tried to sacrifice her to save himself. She walked to the stand with her head down, avoiding Grant's gaze. Her testimony was devastating. She detailed how Grant had approached her months ago, not just for an affair, but for a solution to his financial problems. She explained the composition of the toxin, a blend of digitalis and beta blockers designed to stop a heart without leaving the obvious chemical signature of common poisons. She recounted the phone call on the night of the anniversary, how he had panicked, and how he had thrown her to the wolves the moment the police arrived at the apartment. "He told me we would go to Italy," Tessa said, her voice trembling. "He said once Haley was gone, the money would clear, and we would disappear. But the moment he got scared, he sent me into a trap." Grant's lawyer tried to discredit her, painting her as a scorned lover, but the physical evidence supported every word she said. Finally, the prosecution played the ace, the recording from the hospital room. Darlene's voice filled the chamber, arrogant and dismissive. "You rely too much on other people. Your father never needed a Tessa. He made sure the brakes were faulty." The reaction in the gallery was visceral. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Darlene's face turned a shade of gray that matched the courtroom walls. She realized, in that moment, that she had not just incriminated herself. She had dismantled the entire mythology of her family. She wasn't a socialite. She was a warlord. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for theatrics, looked at the defense table with an expression of pure disgust. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, I did not hold my breath. I breathed in. Grant Morgan, guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Darlene Morgan, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation, and tampering with evidence. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later was the final hammer blow. Grant was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security state prison. With no possibility of parole for the first 20, he wept openly as the bailiffs cuffed him. Looking back at me one last time, I did not look away. I watched him go. Darlene, due to her age and health issues, which the judge clearly viewed with skepticism, received 15 years. She would likely die in prison. She was dragged out screaming curses at the judge, the jury, and finally, at her own son for being too weak to finish the job. Tessa Thorne lost her medical license permanently and was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. She left the courtroom alone, her career and reputation incinerated. The civil proceedings were swift and brutal. The divorce was granted on the grounds of extreme cruelty and attempted murder. The judge awarded me 100% of the marital assets. I received the apartment, the car, the savings, and a court order mandating that Grant repay every cent he had siphoned from our accounts to pay his debts, to be garnished from any prison wages or future assets he might ever acquire. But I did not keep the spoils of war. I sold the apartment a month later. I could not live in a place where the kitchen counter had been a staging ground for my execution. I sold the furniture. I sold the jewelry. I took the money, my money, and I walked away. The final scene of this chapter of my life did not happen in a courtroom. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 6 months after the anniversary that was supposed to be my last. I stood on a new balcony. This one was smaller, overlooking a quiet park in a different city. 3 states away. The air here smelled of rain and pine, not exhaust and betrayal. I had a new job, a consultancy firm where I taught corporations how to detect internal fraud before it became fatal. I had a new phone number. I had a new name, reclaiming the one I was born with. I walked to the railing and looked out at the twilight. In my hand, I held a glass. It was not crystal. It was a simple, sturdy tumbler. Inside, there was no gin, no elderflower liqueur, no hidden chemical agents. It was just water. Clear, cold, life-sustaining water. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. I closed my eyes and listened. I heard the wind in the trees. I heard a dog barking in the distance. I heard the hum of traffic miles away. But for the first time in 5 years, I did not hear the ticking of a clock. I did not hear the frantic whisper of a man hiding secrets. I did not hear the footsteps of someone plotting my demise. I was alone, and in that silence, I found the most beautiful sound in the world. The sound of a future that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story until the very end. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Grant and Darlene's punishment. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more listeners.